From rejected daughter to ruthless vengeance, how I took down my toxic family claimed $12 million. We already put the $25,000 deposit on the boat. Jordan. We can't help you. My father didn't even look up from the model yacht. He was polishing. I stood there. My right ankle throbbing under bloody gauze. Holding the $4,000 bill. That would decide if I ever walked normally again. Dad. I whispered, it's my leg. The doctor said I need surgery this week. My mother just turned the page of her magazine. Looking bored. You're an adult. Honey. Maybe limping for a few months. We'll teach you to be more careful. With that cheap car of yours. From the corner my sister Ashley laughed. Just sell your laptop. It's not like your little freelance hobby pays the bills. Anyway, I looked at the toy boat on the table. Worth 5 times the cost of my surgery. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just turned around and walked out on my broken leg. Knowing exactly what I had to do next. My name is Jordan and I'm 28 years old. People say family comes first. But that night, I realized my family only cared about their image. So I made a plan. I didn't just leave. I came back, bought their debt. And evicted them from the very house they kicked me out of. Have you ever felt like a stranger treated you with more kindness than your own flesh and blood? Drop a comment and tell me your story. I'm reading every single one. The leather sofa squeaked beneath me as I tried to find a position that didn't send shooting pains up my leg. My right ankle was wrapped in thick white gauze, already spotted with fresh blood seeping through. I held the hospital bill in my trembling hand. $4,500. It was the cost of reattaching my torn ligaments after a car accident in the beat-up sedan. My parents refused to help me repair. The doctor had been clear. Surgery immediately. Or a permanent limp for the rest of my life. Across the room, the smell of expensive vanilla candles was suffocating. My father, Dennis, was meticulously polishing a scale model of a yacht with a microfiber cloth. He didn't even look up when I spoke. Dad, I said, my voice tight. I need the surgery. If I don't do it now, I'll never walk right again. He blew a speck of dust off the miniature deck. Jordan. We've already put the deposit down on the new boat. $25,000. It's non-refundable. It's my leg, I whispered. My mother Pamela took a delicate sip of her tea. Her eyes scanning a magazine. You're an adult now, honey. You made the choice to drive that old car. Maybe limping for a few months. We'll teach you to be more careful next time. From the corner armchair, my sister Ashley looked up from her phone and smirked. Why don't you sell that laptop you're always glued to? Freelancing clearly isn't paying the bills if you're here begging. I looked at them. Really looked at them. The polished wood floors. The art on the walls. The $25,000 toy boat sitting on the table. And then I looked at my throbbing, ruined ankle. I didn't say another word. I didn't cry, I simply gripped the armrest. Pushed myself up through the blinding pain. And limped to the door. The silence in the room wasn't awkward, it was cold. It was the silence of people who had watched me bleed. And decided the carpet was more important. I closed the heavy oak door behind me. And in that moment, the daughter who sought their approval died. The creditor was born. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment. My back pressed against the cold drywall. Staring at my purple swollen ankle. The pain was a living thing. Throbbing in time with my heartbeat. But the anger was colder. It was a precise, calculating kind of anger. To understand why I walked out of that mansion without screaming, you have to understand the ledger of my life. In my family, love was a currency and I was perpetually overdrawn. My sister Ashley was the golden investment. 2 years ago, when her luxury organic spa went under. Because she spent the capital on trips to Tulum instead of marketing. My father wrote a check for $50. 000. He called it protecting her credit score. He didn't ask for a repayment plan. He didn't lecture her about responsibility. He just signed the check and told her to try again. Contrast that with me. When I was 22, I borrowed $2. 000 from them to fix my transmission, so I could get to my first job. They made me sign a notarized contract. They charged me 5% interest for 6 months. I ate instant noodles and walked 3 miles to save gas money, just to pay them back early. I thought if I showed them I was responsible, if I showed them I had integrity, they would finally respect me. I was an idiot sitting there on my floor, looking at the eviction notice I knew would come if I paid for surgery instead of rent. The math finally made sense. It wasn't about money. They had plenty of money. They had just put a $25,000 deposit on a boat they would use maybe 3 times a year. They chose a fiberglass hull over their daughter's ability to walk. To them, I wasn't a family member. I was a bad asset. A write-off. A soft knock at the door broke my concentration. I froze if it was my landlord. I was done, Jordan. It's me, Caleb. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, and hopped on one leg to unlock the deadbolt. My brother stood there, in his grease-stained mechanic's coveralls. He looked exhausted. His eyes red-rimmed, smelling like motor oil and stale coffee. Caleb was the only one who didn't look at me like I was a mistake. But he was also the only one without any power. He stepped inside, took one look at my ankle and winced. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. It was mostly 10s and 20s. Crumpled and smelling of the shop, it's 500. He said, his voice rough. I sold my tool set to the new guy. I know it's not 4,000 Jordan. But it's literally everything I have right now. I looked at the dirty bills in his calloused hand. My parents had millions in assets and wouldn't give a dime. My brother, who worked 60 hours a week on his feet, sold his livelihood to give me $500. Keep it, I said, my voice shaking. You need your tools to work. Take it, he insisted, shoving the money into my hand. Please. I can't watch you lose your leg. Because they're monsters. I took the money. Not because it would pay for the surgery. It wouldn't even cover the anesthesia. But because I needed to remember this moment. I needed to remember that, while the people in the mansion let me bleed, the brother with nothing gave me everything. That night after Caleb left, I didn't sleep. I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I went to a predatory lender the next morning. Signed a loan with an interest rate that should have been illegal, and paid for my surgery. I was going to walk again. And once I was back on my feet, I was going to make sure my parents paid for every single step. 2 weeks after the surgery, I was sitting on my thrift store couch, staring at a bowl of lukewarm ramen. My leg was in a cast, propped up on a stack of old magazines. I was physically healing, but financially, I was bleeding out. The predatory loan payments were due in 3 days. And I had exactly $42 in my bank account. I was calculating whether I could sell my plasma while on painkillers, when I remembered the crumpled lottery ticket in my jeans pocket. I bought it at a gas station while picking up my prescription. A $2 tax on desperation. I pulled it out, smoothed the wrinkles against the coffee table, and opened the app on my phone. 12/18/4/33/49 Powerball 7. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and dance around the room. I didn't call Caleb. I just sat there in the absolute, terrifying silence of my apartment, listening to the refrigerator hum. $12 million. The numbers stared back at me, indifferent to my suffering. In the movies, people pop champagne. In real life, when you hand a starving person a feast, they don't celebrate. They get suspicious. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. If my parents knew about this, they would suddenly remember how much they loved their independent daughter. Ashley would suddenly need a business partner. I didn't cash the ticket immediately. Instead, I hired a lawyer. Not a strip mall lawyer, but a corporate shark in a glass tower downtown, who charged $800 an hour. I walked into his office on crutches, looking like a vagrant, and placed the ticket on his mahogany desk. I want two things, I told him. I want this money put into a blind trust, so no one knows my name. And I want a full forensic financial investigation into Dennis and Pamela Miller. 3 days later, I was back in his office. He slid a thick dossier across the desk. I opened it, and the myth of my parents' wealth dissolved into ink and paper. They weren't rich. They were drowning. The mansion on Mercer Island, mortgage to the hilt. They were 3 months behind on payments, and hiding the foreclosure notices. The $25,000 boat deposit, put on a credit card with 22% interest. Ashley's successful spa business. It was bleeding cash. Surviving only because my father was illegally siphoning equity from the house to cover her payroll. I stared at the red numbers. They had refused me $4,000 to save my leg, while they were hemorrhaging $500,000 to save their egos. They weren't just cruel. They were frauds. They were playing a game of chicken with bankruptcy. And they were losing. What do you want to do? My lawyer asked. We can structure your assets to protect you from their creditors. No, I said, closing the file. I don't want to run from their debt. I want to own it. I instructed him to form a shell company. We called it Chimera Holdings. With my new capital, I approached the bank that held my parents' distressed mortgage and Ashley's delinquent business loans. Banks hate bad debt. They'll sell it for pennies on the dollar just to get it off their books. I bought it all. Within 48 hours, I went from being the rejected daughter to the owner of their entire existence. I held the deed to their house. I held the lien on Ashley's spa. They were living on my property, spending money they owed me. I signed the final paperwork with a steady hand. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the predator in the water. And they didn't even know I was swimming beneath them. They thought they were answering to a faceless corporation. They had no idea that Chimera was the girl they told to sell her laptop. The trap wasn't a cage. It was a mirror. I knew my parents better than they knew themselves. I knew that if I approached them as a creditor, demanding payment, they would play the victim. They would cry to their friends, start a GoFundMe and paint me as the villain. But if I approached them as an admirer, offering a golden parachute, they would jump, without checking if the chute was attached. I hired a lawyer named Mr. Sterling to be the face of Chimera Holdings. He was everything my parents worshipped. Older British accent. Wearing a suit that cost more than my brother's annual salary. He met them at a private lunch club downtown. Neutral ground that smelled of old money and exclusion. I wasn't there. But I didn't need to be. I had the audio feed, listening from my car parked a block away. Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Sterling's voice was smooth as velvet. Chimera Holdings specializes in distressed assets with high potential. We see the value in your property. And frankly, we see the value in you. I heard the clinking of silverware. My father cleared his throat. That pompous sound he made when he felt important. Well, we've certainly put a lot of equity into the estate. It's good to see a firm that appreciates quality. Precisely. Sterling continued. That's why we're offering a sale-leaseback agreement. We purchase the property and the business debt immediately. You clear your record. No foreclosure, no public embarrassment. You stay in the home as tenants for a nominal fee. Plus, as a signing bonus to help with operational liquidity, we're issuing a corporate credit card with a $50,000 limit. Silence. Then my mother's voice, breathless. 50,000 and we stay in the house. It's a standard retention package for our VIP clients. Sterling lied effortlessly. I gripped the steering wheel. This was the moment. The document Sterling slid across the table was 50 pages long. Buried on page 42 was clause 42B. It was a legal guillotine. It stated that as tenants, any violation of the lease terms, including late payment by even 1 hour, or unauthorized commercial use of the property, resulted in immediate non-judicial eviction. No grace period, no court hearings. Instant termination. A rational person would ask, what's the catch? A scared person would read every word. But my parents weren't rational or scared. They were narcissists. There is a specific delusion that comes with being a narcissist. The absolute, unshakable belief that the universe owes you a favor. They didn't see a predatory contract. They saw validation. In their minds. Of course a hedge fund wanted to bail them out. Of course. They deserved a $50,000 spending limit. They viewed luck not as a random occurrence, but as a character trait. They believed they were immune to consequences because, in their version of the story, they were the heroes. Arrogance isn't just a flaw. It's a blindfold. They didn't read the contract because they couldn't conceive of a world where someone was smart enough to trick them. Where do we sign? Dennis asked. I heard the scratch of the pen. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. Excellent, Sterling said. Welcome to the Chimera family. As they laughed and ordered a second bottle of wine on their new tab. I took my headphones off. They thought they had just cheated the system. They thought they had found a loophole that would let them keep their lifestyle without paying the price. They didn't realize that the VIP package was just the last meal before the execution. I drove back to my apartment. The signed digital copy of the contract already hitting my inbox. I opened it and scrolled to the signature line. Dennis Miller. Pamela Miller. They hadn't just signed a lease. They had signed a confession of their own greed. The clock was ticking. And I was the only one who could hear it. Thanksgiving at the Miller household was never just a dinner. It was a stage play designed to showcase how perfect their lives were. But this year, fueled by the Chimera Holdings credit line, it was a coronation. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, picking at my stuffing. The room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and expensive perfume. Ashley was holding court, waving a glass of vintage wine paid for unknowingly by me. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet that glittered under the chandelier. It's just so refreshing to finally work with partners who understand vision. Ashley gushed, gesturing vaguely with her wine glass. Chimera isn't like those stuffy banks. They get it. They know you have to spend money to make money. My father nodded, slicing the turkey with a ceremonial gravity that made me want to laugh. Exactly. It takes a certain caliber of person to attract that kind of investment. They saw the potential in this family. Then he paused, the carving knife suspended in the air, and looked down the table at me. His eyes were heavy with pity. You should take notes, Jordan. Look at your sister. She knows how to leverage capital. She's a builder. You're still working for wages. You're playing small ball, while the adults are in the big leagues. Maybe Chimera just likes risky bets, I said quietly, taking a sip of water. My mother sneered. Don't be jealous. At least someone here is securing our legacy. They were eating food I paid for, In a house owned by my company. Wearing clothes charged to my credit line. They didn't see it yet. But they were feasting on their own financial corpse. I no longer felt insulted, only detached. Like a scientist. Watching lab rats devour poison bait. 3 weeks later the bill came due. On the night their lease payment to Chimera Holdings was due. I quietly switched the payment gateway to maintenance. Dennis tried to pay. It failed. He didn't call. He didn't document anything. He assumed the rules didn't apply to him. At midnight the system logged the payment as missed. Automatically. Clause 42B triggered. Immediate lease termination and eviction. The house was mine. So were the loans. Tomorrow I would introduce them to their landlord. I summoned them to a compliance review. They arrived late and furious. Demanding to see Mr. Sterling. I turned in my chair. You'll deal with the chairman. Dennis laughed until I told him the truth. I owned Chimera Holdings. I owned his debt. And he was past the eviction deadline. Slide by slide. I showed them everything. How cheaply I bought their bad debt. How they squandered operating capital on cruises. And handbags. How they signed the clause they never bothered to read. You didn't trick us. My mother whispered. No, I said calmly. You tricked yourselves. Dennis lunged at me in rage. Security restrained him instantly. You own nothing, I said. You have 1 hour to vacate before the locks change. As they were dragged out, Dennis spat one last threat. Boasting about hidden Cayman accounts. I pulled out a single document. IRS Form 211, I already reported those. I said 12 weeks ago. Moments later, IRS criminal investigation agents entered. Dennis and Ashley were arrested for tax evasion and wire fraud. The government would seize the offshore money. My whistleblower reward would be $600. 000. I walked outside into the cold air. It didn't smell like money. It smelled like freedom. I called the only person who mattered. Pack your bags, I said. I just bought the auto shop. We're starting over. Never underestimate the quiet one in the room. They're not weak. They're patient.